Thank you. This year's Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded for a breakthrough in quantum mechanics, which some people refer to lovingly as quantum weirdness, which is perhaps a slap in the face to those who understand it, but to those who don't quite get it, it's a good description. One of the recipients of this year's Nobel Prize in Physics explained to the BBC in an interview that they basically had shown, sort of inadvertently, that physicist Niels Bohr's argument that about one aspect of the nature of reality proved that Albert Einstein was wrong in one specific area. And the Nobel laureate had actually thought Einstein was right. But in fact, Niels Bohr was correct. And I'm not going to explain about it to you, but it's a fascinating piece of science and thinking about the nature of reality. I'll let you look into that yourself. Interesting thing about Niels Bohr is that he apparently began his lecture courses by saying to his students, I quote, "Every sentence that I utter should be regarded by you not as assertion, but as a question." And I found that to be fitting since today's topic is parables. And in other words, every assertion is a question in disguise, especially when one is dealing with religion or religions. And actually, any attempt to understand the nature of reality is really perhaps a question in disguise, and especially within any specific religion when one is engaged in the task of interpreting or understanding something as elusive as parables. Our interpretations are often attempts to clarify ambiguities that really perhaps should remain ambiguous or at least open. To take what is essentially in a story not asking for a clear or a definitive answer, and instead invite people's insight or understanding when one is encountered by a parable in life, such as leaves falling into the ground and becoming life again. We have been taught as students growing up in this world and as thinkers to think logically and thus avoid that which does not have a specific answer. Some mysteries cannot really be solved. Some stories cannot really be explained, but they can perhaps only be lived in our experience, which requires and invites engagement, and it invites a leap of faith. And in that way, some parables can be like Zen koans. A koan is a paradoxical antidote or a riddle that is often used in Zen Buddhism to demonstrate the inadequacy of logical reasoning and to instead provoke enlightened insight. So if we simply look around us, we see what could be considered a parable, albeit mundane, perhaps. Leaves falling. Leaves, simple leaves falling, death becoming life. And it is expected and it is hoped for that death becomes life and that life becomes death, perhaps not hoped for, but expected. They are opposites that are inseparable. They go together, death and life. When separated from biological analysis, they are philosophically and they are theologically difficult to rationalize, to understand, or to explain. And sometimes they are shocking and they're very hard. Leaves are perhaps very colorful parables that demonstrate how all creation lives by dying. Life comes out of death and death comes out of life. So to lighten this up a little bit, I was thinking back to my seminary days when I wanted to take a class on parables, but discovered that the class was full. So what does one do in, at least in this place in seminary, when a class is full and you want in? You show up anyway. So I decided to just show up for the first class to see if I could get in. And the professor, whose name was Bill Herzog, called the names of those who were registered for class, and everybody, ticked off their names. And then he asked if there was anyone who was present who was not on that roster, and I raised my hand. And when I came into the classroom, however, a few minutes earlier, he noticed the shirt that I was wearing. And on this bright yellow t-shirt was a cartoon, a Western scene of two crayons who were drawing each other. So imagine this, two crayons who were drawing each other, but the crayons were dressed in oversized Stetson hats and cowboy boots and holsters. And their arms, the arms of these two crayons were reaching out, actually drawing each other with the crayons that they had drawn from their holsters. All right. And below the cartoon was the word draw. Sort of like Escher's hands drawing each other. Sort of. I looked and I looked for a picture of the shirt that I had on, and I simply could not find it. So this will have to suffice. Hands drawing each other. You can go ahead and put the next one up. And I thought this was a nice, colorful way of understanding something that could be seen out in nature today. Professor Herzog remarked when he asked who I was and what I was doing there, since I wasn't on the roster, he said, well, with a shirt like that, I have no choice but to let you into the class. So our final assignment in that class was to write a parable on a parable, which is not as easy as it sounds. Over the course of the semester, however, I realized that I was living one. It was the season of autumn, and fall season in Berkeley, California is very different than fall season in South Dakota from where I had moved. It was fall when my father died when I was 14. Well, a month ago, I told you a little bit about being affirmed by my grandmother and my great aunt as I sort of decided to become a pastor. But at this time in my life, I was also struggling in other ways. My older son, Jacob, was born a few years before we moved to Berkeley for seminary. And my younger son, Obadiah, was soon to be born in one of the student housing apartments where we lived. So I was a new father with all the angst that accompanies that particular life change. And we, of course, being grad students, were flat broke. And we were adjusting to moving from a small acreage in the Black Hills to California city life and an uncertain future. Well, I had family in the San Francisco Bay Area. My dad's sister, my Aunt Mary, my Uncle Bob, and 5 male cousins who were all within a few years either side of my sister and me, and I did not know any of them. My mom had cut them off from my family for reasons that I felt were not right as I learned about that tension between my mom and my Aunt Mary. And here I was now in the Bay Area, living close by to these family members. It's interesting how we often live in existential angst when we are young, trying to grow up or not trying to grow up, as I was probably doing. I was full of angst. And I felt the need then when I got to the Bay Area to reach out to this family that I did not know. And I still don't understand why I did it the way that I did it. I didn't get on the phone and call my Aunt Mary, which would have made sense. I just randomly picked one of my cousins, one of the boys, Larry, and I contacted him. Well, no surprise there. He was quite surprised and agreed to meet with me after work one day over in San Rafael, across the bay. So I loaded Jacob up in our 73 Volkswagen camper van that we were just trying to get licensed in California, having moved it from South Dakota. And California, of course, was not a state that was friendly to license old Volkswagens that had rebuilt double carbs into, all that kind of stuff. So I put him in the van and we drove over there to San Rafael, crossed the Bay Bridge to meet my cousin Larry. And I was very nervous. I was uncertain. I was excited also. The catch was I didn't have a clue what Larry looked like. And he said he'd meet me out front of his warehouse. So again, it was the end of September. It was the anniversary of my dad's death. That particular day that I went to meet my cousin Larry. For years, every fall, I struggled with depression that was deep within me, unidentified, of course, by me at that time. When leaves were falling, my spirit always died with them. So I pulled up, and out walks my cousin Larry, who looked just like my dad did in his 30s. And I about lost it. I saved it for when we were driving back, so I didn't embarrass myself and my cousin Larry, who wouldn't have a clue what I was crying about. So a week or so later, we all got together, my aunt and my uncle and my 5 cousins and some of their partners and their kids, always having felt this empty space, this huge hole inside of me. I suddenly had family on my dad's side. And of course, I was also angry that it took 30 years to meet them. Well, it was emotionally hard for me to have a son and then to have 2 sons, because my father died when he was 45, and our doctor was a family friend, and a next door neighbor came over that day to explain to us what a brain aneurysm is, which was a good thing to do. But he also said that it might be an inherited condition. Well, what do you think I heard? I was not going to be alive past 45. So then I had no reason to have a long-range plan for my life, because it didn't matter. And I also had no business having children, especially boys who would grow up without a father like I did. And now I had 2. Reaching out then to my dad's side of the family was either an attempt to fill a hole, or perhaps to just make my own given destiny, and thus my son's destinies, more painful to think about, which is often what one does when suffering with depression. Anniversaries of those who have passed can do that to you. And you mix it with depression, and it's just a self-fulfilling understanding. And here I was in a class on parables, and I had now a chance to write about it. So when I was cleaning out my office in preparation to retire this last year, I found this journal that actually published the parable that I wrote for that class. And I sent it to my sons, and I have not really talked to them about what they thought about it. I'm going to send it again with this talk, especially to my son who's now in a treatment program, and hope it helps heal a bit. It's called Reflections on Reflections. I'm thinking about what to say to you all this morning hovers around nature's time when life changes and my own internal clock when my life changed. Sometimes it's just easier to speak in parables. This is the parable upon which I wrote a parable. It's from the Gospel of Luke. He said, "Therefore, what is the kingdom of God like, and to what should I compare it? It is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in the garden. It grew and became a tree, and the birds of the air made nests in its branches." November 16th. Leaves are falling today. Each year at this time they fall. And each year at this time I begin to feel again and to remember. I don't know which comes first, memories or feelings. Maybe they come at the same time. It doesn't matter. I only know the memories are not without feelings. And the feelings brought on by the crisp air and brilliantly covered leaves stir the memories into being once again, like calling forth the ghosts, the dead from time past. Funny that something so alive as a leaf could bring forth something so dead. But maybe it's the death of the leaf that does it. Or maybe it's that memories aren't really dead. Leaves don't really die, so why should memories? They are part of me as I live, just as leaves are part of new life. I remember watching the leaves blow to the ground on a windy fall day, falling to the earth. Sometimes if you watched closely, you could see one right at the moment it detached from the tree, finding its freedom on the wind until it landed. I must have done that a million times when I was a child. Fall in a small town is beautiful. It seemed like everyone came out in the fall. They came out for the raking of the leaves. It was a ritual. Everyone came out to say goodbye to the old and greet the new. And one by one, the lawns would empty of leaves. If someone was late, you called to see if they were okay. Adults and the older kids raked the leaves into huge piles while the younger ones jumped into them. Raking leaves was for kids, so the kids thought. It was like the town was saying its last farewell to summer and getting ready to dig in for winter, but no one was thinking that. No one thought that soon winter would come and bury them under a blanket of snow. Fall held them captives. They disappeared in its beauty, its life. That was the kind of place to grow up in, the kind of place you could raise a child in. November 23rd. Fall was more than that. Fall had its secrets, which only I knew of. Fall always takes me back there, to the kind of place I grew up in, to the kind of place you could raise a child in, to the kind of place a child could be a king or a queen, a secret king or queen in a private world, king and queen of the abandoned farmhouses which became a palace, kings and queens of the surrounding fields which became a realm to rule over, kings and queens of the river valleys and the creek beds where imagination starts its journey downstream to other lands. It's all for the child. Fall held the keys to their realm. Fall makes the heart run wild. The leaves are just beginning to fertilize the ground, but growth is already present. It is understood, it is expected and known. The birth of a new season and the death of another. It was a constant. Yet the ritual is always changing, always new. And in fall, there was always something new, something being born. A child could own that town in the fall. Fall created kings and queens. Falling leaves do that to me. They take me there, to the kind of place you could raise a child. November 25th. And then they die. They leave me in sadness. Sometimes I wish the memories would die, just be gone. I moved here after it happened, hoping. But the memories have not disappeared like I hoped they would. Even though the seasons don't change much here, I guess they still change inside, like an alarm that you can't shut off no matter how hard you try. There are no leaves in the city. Not really. There are trees, sure, and they have leaves and they turn colors in the fall, but they're not real leaves. Not really. Real leaves go somewhere. They go into the ground and they turn into trees. But where do the leaves in the city go? They just fall off the trees and blow around in the streets until they disintegrate. They just disappear. They have nothing to hold on to. They can't get back into the ground. They are dead. This is a bad thing. I saw a tree that looked like a person standing alone in a crowded place and on a little patch of dirt. And I wondered what would happen to that person if they died. If they just fell over and died. There's not enough space for them to get back into the ground. They would just break up and fall into the cracks in the cement. They wouldn't really die. They would just kind of disintegrate and disappear. It's easy to disappear in the country. It's easier in the city. There are no seasons here, not really. There is no fall, not really. I know this as I see leaves starting to change and remember when I knew real fall, when I owned fall, when he owned fall, and remember why I came here. This is no place to raise a child. November 28th. I have this job offer. I would have to move to a small town back there. I see the leaves falling and I don't know if I can move to that kind of place. November 29th. It was on a fall day like today that we buried him. I remember the leaves blew into his small grave and landed on his pine box. He would take fall with him. Final entry is December 1st. Now I am lost. I don't know what to do. The choice seems obvious, but I'm not sure I can rake leaves anymore. I'm not sure I can watch the leaves melt into the ground like he did. I know leaves turn into trees, but the winter is long, so long. I can't decide what to do. I am afraid. As I read through these reflections in a friend's journal late one evening, I was forced to my own son's bedside to reassure myself in the rhythm of his breathing. But if I take my friend's writings seriously, I wonder if I too am missing something. Sometimes it's better just to speak in parables. The opposite of remember is not to forget. The opposite of remember is dismember. To remember can be to remember, to be put back together again. In our brokenness, we can become whole. Perhaps we cannot be whole without being broken. Wholeness is the hope and the promise of being human and being whole in the midst of life's brokenness. We all experience it. We all live the questions. We live within the parable. Amen. Our song is a word of hope and assurance about life within that parable.